So I had a lot of fun doing the last King of the Hill video, and there were some entries that I didn't quite get to in the last video, so a second video definitely felt like it was in order. So thanks for watching the last one, your support means a lot. Really quickly, let's go over what an iceberg video is. I'm going to go through each point from top to bottom and discuss each of them. The top are more well-known theories or facts, and as you go further down into the dark unknown, things start to get a bit weirder and sometimes more abstract. And yes, this is part 2, I'll link part 1 down in the description, as well as the iceberg list I'm basing this video off of. And as always, there might be some spoilers ahead. I mean, the show's been cancelled for like a decade now, so it might be a bit hard to spoil it. And hey, while we're here, comment down below what you'd like to hear me talk about next, and make sure you subscribe if you haven't. Bart Simpson doll. So, as we know, King of the Hill originally aired from '97 to 2010 on Fox, right alongside other shows such as Family Guy and The Simpsons. And the shows would regularly poke fun at or have nods to each other. I always liked this one when I was younger.
Propane.
But this point in particular references a Bart Simpson doll seen in the background of a King of the Hill scene. In the season 6 episode I'm with Cupid, it's just kind of in the background of the scene up on the bookshelf. And coincidentally, I'm with Cupid, the title of the episode where the doll appears, is also the name of a Simpsons episode. I mean, it's a fairly obvious pun. And honestly, good luck finding a joke The Simpsons hasn't already made.
Simpsons did it.
Pencil sketch. This is a reference to the sketch animation style trailer / pilot thing that was created before the show. You can actually still find this older piece of animation on YouTube. It's interesting seeing how well thought out and developed most of the characters actually are already. Like, a lot of what's happening really does feel like it could have been ripped straight out of an episode. The voice acting is a smidge different, which is something that happens pretty regularly when getting a show like this off the ground. It's a very interesting piece of animation history. 15 or 20 years of Propane. So the timeline of King of the Hill is messy, to say the least. It's something that I talked about in a bit more depth in my How Broke is Hank Hill video, where I did my best to try and pull together something of a coherent timeline. But nothing will ever really be the definitive timeline for the show, because the series lives on what's known as a floating timeline, which is just a fancy way of saying that even though the show always seems to take place in the current year, none of the characters ever seem to age. Aside from a few instances here and there, like Joseph going through puberty and a couple of babies being born. The point, again, just being that the show's timeline is messy. In fact, we're not really even sure how long Hank has actually been selling propane. At some times he claims that it's been 15 years, and at other times we hear it was 20. It could be 15-ish, and it could be getting rounded up out of simplicity, but we'll never likely get a definitive answer. And coincidentally, supposedly in the upcoming King of the Hill revival, we'll have a pretty huge time jump and we'll get to see the cast looking much older. Wes Archer. Wes Archer has two different meanings when it comes to King of the Hill. First, there's the more obvious of the two, the death row inmate that Peggy spent some time with. The other being Wesley Archer, the show's supervising director for the series' first 3 seasons. It seems pretty likely that the character in the show was named in honor of the real Wes Archer. It wouldn't be the first time a show's done something like that or made jokes like that. In Futurama, Fry comes across a character named Billy West before saying that sounds like a fake name, the joke being that Fry's voice actor was Billy West. And in King of the Hill, as Peggy says that name is a good name for a killer, the name flashes on screen for Wesley Archer having directed the episode. YTPs in Alianto's edits. YouTube poops are a brilliant style of editing and a proud part of YouTube's history. They're essentially a video mashup or edit created by remixing / editing pre-existing media sources, often carrying subcultural significance into a new video for humorous, satirical, obscene, and profane, as well as annoying, confusing, or dramatic purposes. At least that's the technical definition according to Wikipedia. They're some of my favorite YouTube videos, and King of the Hill lends itself to YouTube poops in a borderline perfect way. The more dry, straightforward style of comedy and animation allows editors to do some really weird and crazy things with the videos. Aliantos in particular had a pretty unique style of editing when it came to King of the Hill poops. They made these really weird, kind of disturbing edits of King of the Hill that are actually kind of hard to explain. It sort of feels like something of a mix of a creepypasta and a nightmare all rolled into one. Links in the description. Monsignor Martinez gaslit Peggy. Monsignor Martinez is the main character of an in-universe show about a Spanish Catholic priest who is a mercenary and is often caught in action while at church. At least that's how I introduced his character in the last video. This time we're talking about the time that Peggy assumed that Eduardo, the actor who plays the fictional Monsignor / mercenary, was actively flirting with her. This happens in Season 8, Episode 5, Flirting with the Master. And it ends, as most storylines with Peggy do, with absolute embarrassment and Peggy being absolutely wrong. You see, Peggy only thought that Monsignor Martinez was flirting with her. In reality, his wife was just out of town and he's not attracted to Peggy at all. But what if he was actually lying to Peggy after he was caught? What if he was really gaslighting her? Okay, so gaslighting is one of those terms that's been thrown around a lot, and the exact definition of what it is may have been kind of muddled. So the technical definition is psychological manipulation of a person, usually over an extended period of time, that causes the victim to question the validity of their own thoughts, perception of reality, or memories, and typically leads to confusion, loss of confidence and self-esteem, uncertainty of one's emotional or mental state, and a dependency on the perpetrator. So is that what's happening here? Is Monsignor Martinez leading Peggy on and just kind of playing weird mind games? Well, there's definitely some points in the episode that seem to indicate that might actually have been the case. Let's start at the beginning. While giving her a tour of his house, the Monsignor gives Peggy a bottle of wine and tells her that his wife is, quote, with the ancestors, which 100% makes it sound like she's dead, right? But nope, she's actually off visiting her grandparents. And of course, there's the use of informal Spanish around the house. But I mean, this point at least is pretty easy to debunk. I mean, who wants to be super formal all the time? Like, you're gonna be there for a bit. It's an attempt to be friendly. I don't necessarily believe this one too much. I really do think it's just Peggy's incredibly inflated ego shining through. Not to mention, her husband's idea of romance is installing a second sink. That's not exactly gonna light any fires, so to speak. But I really don't have any explanations for the whole with the ancestors thing. That's such a weird way to put it, even if English isn't your first language, that it does leave a kind of lingering doubt in the back of my mind. Shi-Sha meaning. So this is kind of a short one. Shi-Sha is something that we hear a lot in the show. It's basically Dale's catchphrase if catchphrases were more of a thing in King of the Hill. On the surface level, it's just something fun and quirky and random that Dale can just sort of yell out. But is it possible there's another layer underneath? As the Google Translate says it, Shi-Sha is actually incredibly similar to Russian for USA. Dale knowing Russian wouldn't be too surprising. We've seen him kind of speak Russian in the show, like in the episode Tanking It to the Streets. But according to some people, it's not really Russian, it's more similar to Ukrainian, but with a super thick accent. But still, the idea of Dale running around yelling USA, USA in Russian is pretty funny. Tilly is a bad parent too. Tilly Garrison is the 69-year-old mother of Hank Hill. She was married to Cotton, who was generally a piece of trash to her. This point is looking to talk about how Tilly was kind of a bad parent and generally a terrible person too. But the thing is, most of her terribly annoying behavior is only seen or talked about when Hank is an adult. Like when her and Gary visit Hank and his family over Christmas. As soon as they're left alone, they start to do the horizontal monster mash on the family's kitchen table. And I mean, if you want to do that on your own table, cool, go for it. But don't use someone else's table, that's a dick move. And when Hank sees it, he actually goes blind from the psychological trauma that it causes him. But at least Tilly and Gary have a healthy relationship, you know? Until she starts cheating on him, that is. Another dick move. And there's how she makes Hank stick up for her at Thanksgiving dinner with Cotton, but she never once stands up for him when her friends are mean to Hank. It's a weird double standard she has. So while it's not as straightforward as Tilly is a bad parent, it's more that Tilly is just not a great person all the time. And if that's how she was to Hank when he was younger, then maybe she was a bad parent. But there's nothing that really straight up says it. But her few appearances have made me hate Tilly on a level that Peggy or someone like her couldn't even begin to approach. Pygmalion Urban Legends. Pygmalion is kind of a special episode for King of the Hill, in that it sticks out like a sore thumb. It's much darker than basically any episode of King of the Hill, and it's garnered quite a reputation because of that. And with great notoriety comes great creepypastas and urban legends. One of them revolves around searching for a VHS copy of the original ending for the episode, one that supposedly shows Tripp's mutilated corpse, the couple of people who saw the VHS saying they had nightmares. Honestly, it's not a particularly exciting read or anything. Like, the vast majority of the creepypasta is just them trying to find the VHS, with just like the last paragraph being about the actual watching of the tape. The urban legend of the original ending has been swirling around the internet for a bit, but it's really just not true. Boomhauer is Bobby's father. Okay, so last video we talked about a theory that put forward that Bill was actually Bobby's father instead of Hank. And there were a good bit of comments saying how Peggy says who she slept with and everything. But like, if that theory were true, she'd probably lie about it, right? Anyways, this time we're talking about Boomhauer. So what evidence is there that Boomhauer is actually Bobby's father instead of Hank? Well, there's really just like 2 or 3 things. First is that Bobby is blonde, like Boomhauer. That's actually the best evidence behind this. I mean, we know Boomhauer gets around a lot, but it's not exactly evidence. And neither is the fact that Peggy even knew Boomhauer before she knew Hank. Speaking of which, how did Peggy even get to Arlen? It doesn't really make much sense. Anyways, kind of a weaker theory, even weaker than the Bill being the father theory. Boomhauer is not a Texas Ranger. So at the end of the episode, we find out that Boomhauer works as a Texas Ranger, a cop, not a baseball player. Wait, I made that joke last time. Anyways, a few people actually brought up in the comments of the last video that it didn't make much sense for Boomhauer to be a cop because of a lot of the things we see him do in the series. We've seen him break many a crime with his friends, and if he's not deeply undercover as Dale's friend, it doesn't generally seem like it'd be typical Texas Ranger behavior. So the question turns to, why? Why would Boomhauer have a Texas Ranger badge if he's not actually a Texas Ranger? Well, sometimes the simplest answer is the one that's true. Boomhauer's just using the badge to do Boomhauer things, to pick up ladies. Balloon fear. Globophobia, the fear of balloons, the fear that clowns hate most. This point is talking about Bill's fear of balloons, something that we see talked about in the season 12 episode, It Came From the Garage. Now this might seem a bit weird when you take into consideration that we've seen Bill with balloons in the past, so it's actually kind of easy to write this off as just one of the show's many continuity issues that we've seen pop up from time to time throughout the show's run. But in reality, this might just be a bit of a callback to something that happened much earlier in the series. In season 7's episode, The Miseducation of Bobby Hill, Bill goes on a pretty terrifying flight on a lawn chair attached to some weather balloons, after Dale fails to shoot him in the heart, that is. It's certainly possible that this horrifying flight left some psychological scars on Bill, or at least more psychological scars than were already there. Missing and Death Picks Cotton. So in the episode Death Picks Cotton, an absolutely amazing pun by the way, Cotton dies. The only person actually by his side at the time of his death is Peggy, and those two hated each other. Hank was kind of there, but he wasn't in the room at the time. But what's really weird is that his wife and his newborn child weren't present. Yes, he dies pretty quickly after the shellfish allergy and outburst at the Japanese restaurant, but it's still a little weird that his wife and almost newborn child are barely even a thought throughout the episode. I get that the episode is mostly about Hank trying desperately to get some kind of closure with his father, something that really only happens because Peggy lied to him, which, honestly, good for Peggy for doing that. Joseph found out in Spin the Choice. Okay, so Joseph is very obviously not Dale's biological son, and if Dale secretly knows is a bit of a point of contention. But what if Joseph had actually found out in the season 5 episode Spin the Choice? This episode is focused around John Redcorn and the rest of the King of the Hill cast on Thanksgiving, and John Redcorn finally deciding he needs to tell both Dale and Joseph that he's actually Joseph's father. This, of course, following Joseph saying some pretty ignorant things about John Redcorn's, and ironically his own, ancestors. But before John Redcorn even gets the chance, Joseph has a talk with his mother, who tells Joseph a lot about John. This theory puts forward that Nancy finally told Joseph the truth. That would really explain the speech that he gives to John at the end of the episode. It also speaks to Joseph's character that even after he found out that John was his father, he still realized that Dale was the one who raised him. And even if he was going to try to be more tolerant and accepting of John, he still loved Dale, which, all things considered, is super sweet. Hank Jr. song. So, Hank Williams Jr., a pretty influential country music star, actually wrote and recorded an entire song all about King of the Hill, or specifically Hank Hill. The song talks all about his white shirt and his glasses and barbecue, you know, King of the Hill stuff. The song's alright. I mean, Hank Williams Jr. isn't his father or anything, but it's okay. The whole thing's on YouTube. I'll link that down below if you want to take a listen. Cotton killed 0 men. There are only a few certains within the confines of King of the Hill. Hank Hill loves propane and propane accessories. Joseph isn't Dale's biological son. That's my purse, I don't know you. And Cotton killed 50 men. Except, what if he didn't kill 50 men? What if he killed 0? Cotton, as we've seen time and time again in the series, is kind of a trash person. He's mostly hated by basically everyone except his new wife, Bobby, and Topsy. So with all of the generally terrible actions we've seen from him throughout the show's run, would it be surprising to add stolen valor on top of that? But of course, we need to talk about why this theory doesn't stand up to too much criticism. So we know that Cotton was definitely in war, specifically in several of the bloodiest battles of World War II. He's definitely won a Medal of Honor, was a colonel of some kind, and was treated as a hero on parade day. It may not have specifically been 50 men, but Cotton did serve in war and probably did kill a good amount of people. This Reddit comment outlines it super nicely. John Redcorn, King in Yellow. The King in Yellow is another name for the outer god Hastur. But Hastur isn't your run-of-the-mill dark god. He's actually a being of pure corruption. He's also Cthulhu's half-brother. That doesn't have anything to do with this, but I just think it's really funny seeing that while researching. So this Reddit post puts forward that John Redcorn is actually an agent of this great old one. Here's some evidence. He turns Nancy against her husband through seduction, even having a son with her. He attempts to lure his son Joseph away from the Gribble family and realize his true heritage, which would have a devastating effect on Arlen society. In the same episode, his teachings turn Bobby against his father and the Thanksgiving holiday in general. He violently reacts to Hank's dream about Nancy, which reinforces Hank's instinct to keep the secret from his wife. His influence on Nancy causes her to send a female exterminator to him in an attempt to corrupt her affections for Dale. As a children's music power agent, he corrupts Luann into selling out, diminishing her art and causing stress. Now, that's all great and whatnot, but it just shows that John Redcorn has done some not so great things. What does that have to do with the King in Yellow? Well, take a look at this picture. That's a bit of a weird symbol, right? Now take a look at the yellow sign, the symbol of the cult that worships Hastur. They're pretty similar, and it would certainly add a weird tone to everything that we see John Redcorn doing throughout the series. Hank is not straight-laced. When you think of Hank Hill, you typically think of someone who's doing their utmost to stay as normal and by the books as possible. Straight-laced. His biggest problems with Bobby typically come from Bobby just doing something that goes against the grain, something that really shakes things up in this small Texas town. But despite his best efforts, Hank isn't nearly as straight-laced as he likes to think he is, or as he tries to put himself forward as. For starters, we've seen Hank break several laws throughout the show's run. Granted, some of the times he's broken the law, it was by accident, like buying cocaine instead of fish bait. But other times, it's not entirely by accident, like when he housed a child that Peggy accidentally kidnapped, or when he drove and helped return a stolen military truck, or when he made Peggy break an NDA. While all of this is him trying to do the right thing, he is still actively breaking the law. And even when he's not doing anything illegal, Hank does do a lot of weird things that you realistically wouldn't expect someone as supposedly straight-laced as Hank to do. like taking part in a dog dance competition with Ladybird, competing directly against his son actually. Hank's obviously a guy who's doing his best and whose morals are kind of evolving with the times, but he's definitely not as straight-laced as he'd like everyone to think he is. Peggy purposely killed Cotton. Okay, so when you look at this, it's not nearly as murdery as you might think. Like, this theory isn't saying that Peggy physically killed Cotton or anything, but rather that she said some stuff that did directly result in him losing his life. While Cotton is laying in his hospital bed clinging to life, Hank has to leave the room. This just leaves Peggy and Cotton alone. And these two hate each other. So Peggy really goes off on Cotton, saying in part, "I hope you do go on living as the unhappy person you are in the hell you have created here on Earth. I hope you live forever, I really do." Right before Cotton dies. Basically just saying the absolute last thing you should say to someone in that situation. And that would upset Cotton so much that it would overwhelm and ultimately kill him. Peggy killed Tripp Larson. So we've already talked about how dark the episode Pygmalion was, but what we haven't fully talked about was how Tripp Larson died. He was impaled. Because I mean, they couldn't really have gotten away with showing that at like 8 o'clock on Fox. But as Tripp Larson is able to wrestle back control of his mind, Peggy pulls a lever that she thinks is going to reverse the machine. But as soon as she does, Tripp is impaled and dies. While it's probably manslaughter or self-defense at best, Peggy is fully responsible for this man's death, with him seemingly coming back to his senses moments before his death, adding a bit of extra sadness on top of everything. And that's where we'll end this Iceberg video. If you like this, comment down below if you want to see more content like it in the future. Follow me on Twitter at TimKBill to stay up to date on everything I'm working on. Support us on our Patreon if you like this content and want to see more like it. And of course, make sure you subscribe for all your entertainment-related content.